In a small number of cases, people can have quite serious psychological effects from Mefloquine. And, these can be quite alarming.
Well, over time it's had a very severe impact on me, and it's been devastating for me personally. It's been devastating for my career and also for my family.
Major Stuart McCarthy is a living example of the potential side effects of Mefloquine. In 2001, when he served with UN forces in Ethiopia and Eritrea, he was prescribed the drug, also known as Lariam, to ward off malaria. But before long, his mental health began to deteriorate.
During that time, I experienced severe depression. And it reached the point where I started to have suicidal thoughts. When I returned home to Australia at the end of that deployment, the depression continued, and even within a week after I'd returned to Australia, I then went and got some medical help, and I was then diagnosed for depression.
He's one of hundreds of ADF veterans now campaigning for a ban. The Department of Defence is well aware of their concerns and now only issues Mefloquine as a last resort.
You have to assess each person individually and understand their risks and their other medical conditions or their history of medical conditions and their current environment. So I think if you made an assessment that people were at risk of psychological illness or of high levels of stress or anxiety, that would certainly influence your decision about whether to prescribe Mefloquine to those people.
But despite the recent attention on defence veterans, Lateline can reveal the drug continues to be given to asylum seekers en masse. A statement from the Immigration Department reads, "Transferees and refugees on Manus Island are offered anti-malarial medication Mefloquine and are advised of the risk if they do not take it. International health and medical services advise transferees and refugees of side effects of Mefloquine. All persons receiving the medication are monitored for adverse reactions consistent with the IHMS clinical policy and procedures." In late 2012, when Labor was in power, asylum seekers were being given another drug, Malarone, which has far fewer side effects. But the decision was made to make the switch to the more controversial Mefloquine.
You only need to take it once a week, generally. So that makes it easier for people taking the drug. Most of the other drugs that we use for preventing malaria need to be taken daily. So that's a bit of a barrier for people, and we find that their compliance, the rate at which they take the drug, how well they adhere to that, isn't as good as it is for Mefloquine.
Lateline has been told before the switch only about 30% of asylum seekers were taking Malarone daily as required. Fearing an outbreak of malaria, a decision was made to change to Mefloquine. One senior medical professional who worked on Manus Island at the time described it as Sophie's choice.
When we use anti-malarial drugs, to help protect people against malaria, we're balancing the benefits of protection against malaria, which is a serious disease, a life-threatening disease, versus the risks of taking these medications.
The fragile mental state of asylum seekers on Nauru and Manus Island has been well documented. Some have been tortured in their country of origin, others have turned to self-harm or attempted suicide after long periods of detention.
It's simply not a drug that should be taken when it's given to people who are in a high stress environment, and particularly when they're facing trauma. There are much safer drugs that have been available for right through the history of Mefloquine.
It's a pretty terrible circumstance to have these people put in, and what it shows is just how unsuitable Manus Island is as a place to keep refugees.
The Immigration Department says it's now taking steps to offer alternatives to Mefloquine. There are currently 3 TGA-approved anti-malarial drugs. A spokesperson for immigration told Lateline, following advice from IHMS and the department's chief medical officer, that all 3 should be made available. The department is considering how best to implement it.